Good evening, hello. This video is basically going to be discussing why people could potentially buy Japanese, should potentially buy Japanese, and the reasons for it, and why people buy in the first place, and why are certain prices higher than others. It's a lot to discuss, actually, but it's very interesting, actually, the history of games, from how they started, and the explosion, obviously, of Sega Mega Drive and Super Nintendo, and obviously the Super Famicom, which was the Japanese equivalent. But I've written down some numbers. It's a bit maybe too many numbers, but basically I've kind of discovered myself just by poking around. Obviously Wikipedia's obvious source, but just having a little look around. Why are the prices of certain games higher for one console than they are for another console? Why is there such an abundance of games for certain consoles and not for others, and such? So my first example would be the Super Famicom. So the Super Nintendo was released in 1990 in Japan, 1991 in America, and it sold 23.35 million consoles in the Americas. Now that's what this website quoted. This, obviously, I didn't pick this number out of thin air. So 23.35 million. And in 1991, the population of America was 252 million. So like 10% of the population bought a fucking Super Nintendo. That's like unbelievable. That's unbelievable. What's more unbelievable, maybe less so unbelievable, but it's still unbelievable. For example, this is, no, that wouldn't be. Yeah, it would be nearly 10%. Less than 10%. It's less than 10%. It's not. But in Japan, they sold 17.16 million units of the Super Famicom, and their population was just, I say just, but it was just 123 million. So that equates to more than 10%, because 10% would obviously be 12.3 million units. So something like 15% of the population in Japan actually bought a Super Famicom, which is just staggering. 15% of any population going out and buying a video games machine. I mean, that's a astronomical commercial success. So it's obvious to see why you compare 8% of the population in America by. Also, we're talking about the PAL region as well. We sold a lot less for your European games, which is why our European games are so astronomically priced, so scarce, and it's just basically impossible to sort of get a fully boxed collection nowadays. Probably you could, but you'd have to be a millionaire. You'd literally have to be a millionaire to make a full, complete Super Nintendo boxed collection. It's ridiculous. So that's basically, I think, the reasons behind why Super Famicom games are cheap, because more than 15% of the population in Japan in 1990 bought a Super Famicom. They took it into their homes. They also had a library almost twice the size of the Super Nintendo, so they naturally would have sold more games. So the Super Famicom had 1,442 games released for it, and the SNES only had 784 licensed titles released for it. So you can see why there's just a shed load of games. Now, there are anomalies, if you like. I mean, there's certain games that obviously that are exclusive to the Super Famicom that are very expensive, and you're just going to have to, if you want them, you're going to have to pay for them. But they are there. You can see them. Sometimes for PAL games, you never see them on eBay or any other auction website for that matter, and it's very difficult. I can name a few for PAL, I know, because from experience. Mega Man X3, Separation Anxiety, what others were I looking for? Shadowrun was another one that's difficult to find for PAL. Mega Man X2, Mega Man 7, uh, some squirrel game, number 2. I forget the whole list of games that were for the Super Nintendo, but they were really scarce, and it's really difficult to compare. So that was basically just an overview of my belief, the reasons for the Super Famicom games being so cheap in comparison. They sold a hell of a lot more. Owen mentioned on a comment once that they seem slightly less enamoured to their retro games than Western society do, and I think to a certain extent that's quite true, because here they sell like cartridges and box games for the same price, so there's no real disparity between the two, and I find that quite an oddity, really, because if it was a collector-driven market, the collectors would be mad for a boxed game, and they wouldn't be. The shops, the retail stores wouldn't be charging the same prices for both. There are exceptions. There are stores that know what they're selling, but you're talking about the budget shops here. They just sell everything for the same price, which is weird and odd for me to understand, especially games that are 20, 25 years old, vintage games. You expect them to at least have worked out by now that some of them are obviously collector's items and should be sold varying prices depending on their condition. But I'm just going to move on to something else as well. So the Famicom has a library of 1,054 games, and the NES has 709 licensed games and 113 unlicensed games, bringing its total to 822. Now the reasons for collecting, let's say for example Super Famicom games, it's got a wider library. It's cheaper. The box art is probably nicer. In my opinion, it definitely is. It's also much more collectible now than it was ever, I think. It's also much more interesting to collect for, because there's lots of games that you don't know about because of the huge library, and because if you haven't delved into that before, there's obviously going to be lots of unknowns for you, which are very enjoyable to discover. You know, it's not just like, oh, I know this, I've been watching it in my eBay for like 2 months, and you know, you've played it before, or you've got a ROM or whatever. It's not like that. It's totally different. So that's one reason. The other reason is the price is much cheaper. The abundancy, that you're not going to be pulling your hair out with frustration, saying, oh, I want this game, or looking like tracking it down. That is fun to a certain extent, but there's a limit where it just gets boring and tedious. And if you're collecting and you want to actually have a decent collection, then I think that pulling your hair out and trying to track down things is a drawback rather than... but yeah, it can be appealing for some people. I can understand that, but just having games readily available, being able to collect them in really nice conditions, because the Japanese games are in really nice conditions, so that's a really nice bonus. So that's a good thing. So yeah, the price and the Famicom. If you're going to collect Famicom cartridges as well, the good thing about those is that they look really nice. The cartridges themselves are colourful, and I prefer that personally. I prefer the Nintendo Entertainment System box art in North America and Europe compared to the Famicom game box art. But I prefer the Super Famicom game box art definitely over the PAL. The PAL, they bordered off most of the box art with black lines, and it just it had its moments. Secret of Mana is beautiful, but generally it's not really that appealing. Some of those games. I'm just going to move on because I might run out of time, but basically, if we talk about another Nintendo, this is an anomaly as well in terms of game prices, because Super Famicom games on the whole are cheaper to collect, especially boxed, complete in box, than Super Nintendo equivalents. Famicom games are generally cheaper than Nintendo Entertainment System games, but there is one anomaly, and that is the GameCube. And I kind of covered it, brushed over it lightly with some butter in my last video, because I started to collect for the GameCube, and I just was curious as to why these games were so bloody expensive, and I just did a little bit of research on the GameCube sales themselves, and it came up that in America they sold nearly 13 million units GameCube consoles, and in Japan they sold just 4 million. 4 million. I mean, that's a tiny percentage of the population, and a fraction of what they sold in America. And other regions it worked out at 4.77 million. So right there you can see why. Now people now are starting to realise the quality of the GameCube library. It was the GameCube was overlooked mainly because, and especially in Japan, must have been because of the PlayStation 2's imminent arrival, and its DVD capabilities, which were just going to break new ground for a console to have in your house. And it literally did in Asia. It broke new ground because everyone was using Laserdiscs before the PlayStation 2. As soon as the PlayStation 2 came out, bang. I haven't written down the PlayStation 2 sales. I should have now, thinking of it, but you can have a look at that. They're probably huge, basically, because it was one of the best-selling consoles of all time. Of course, I mean, I remember my 18th birthday in the year 2000, and I got a PlayStation 2 for my 18th birthday, and that's all I wanted. I completely overlooked the GameCube. But going back to the sales, 4 million in Japan, 13 million in America. You can see why the games here are much more expensive. They were also produced in cardboard sleeves, with cardboard sleeves. So those cardboard sleeves, they tend to deteriorate. So you can see why Japanese GameCube games are quite expensive. Another anomaly is not so much of an unknown anomaly, I think, but the Mega Drive, which is obviously called the Sega Genesis in America. In America, it sold 20 million units. Apparently, in Japan, it sold only 4.5 million. Now, that's hard to believe, really, for Japan. It's hard to believe that Japan wouldn't buy so many Mega Drives. For me, I don't know why. Maybe it was the advertising campaign, partly in America, or I don't know. I couldn't put my finger on it, but basically you can attribute that to the cost of Japanese Mega Drive games, which are also very high. Sometimes even compared to American Mega Drive prices, Japanese price and the UK and European Mega Drive power prices. Japanese Mega Drive is quite expensive because in Europe we sold 6.9 million units of that as well. So you can see why a lot of these games probably sold for more, because in Japan, if the consoles sold for less, sold in less numbers, then the games tended to be more expensive, whereas a higher percentage of the population here bought Super Famicoms, and therefore there was a high abundance of games. Also, Japanese people tend to look after their games a lot better, so I'd assume that has some factor involved in the quality of the complete and boxed games that you can get hold of. There's not really more I can put to it. It's just that if you're going to collect Super Famicom and Famicom games over SNES and NES, then that is probably a wise choice. If you're going to collect Mega Drive and GameCube games, the Sega Mega Drive games for the Japanese Mega Drive are beautiful. They've got really stunning box art, and they tend to last, obviously, because they're produced in hard plastic cases. GameCube, unless you're mad for Japanese GameCube, there really isn't that much difference, really, as far as I can see. There are different games. I didn't write down the total difference in the library, but there are different games, and I've got different games as well already for the GameCube. But it's just that's about it, really. I can't really put any more to it. Just if you're going to buy Japanese, then do a little bit of research and try and find out which console sold the most in Japan. It's probably natural. Put it this way: the Saturn sold 6 million consoles in Japan, and that's why they probably produced a larger library for it, like lots of shooters and stuff like that. And they didn't focus much attention on the Saturn in America because they only sold 1.5 million units. Anyway, that's it. So thank you for watching, and see you again.